Do you know the Lemony Snicket books? Remember we had Lemony Snicket here on the show once? That was very cool. The whole idea of the Lemony Snicket books is that they are books for kids and about kids that are also about tragedy and terribly horrible horribleness. The whole series is called A Series of Unfortunate Events. Just to give you a sense of what it's like, the dedication of the first book, to Beatrice, darling, dearest, dead. Here's how the very first book starts. Chapter 1. If you are interested in stories with happy endings, you would be better off reading some other book. In this book, not only is there no happy ending, there is no happy beginning and very few happy things in the middle. This is because not very many happy things happened in the lives of the three kids who the book is about. It goes on to describe them. They were extremely unlucky, and most everything that happened to them was rife with misfortune, misery, and despair. I'm sorry to tell you this, but that is how the story goes. It's awesome, right? Does it remind you of anything?
We drift, quarreling and paralyzed, over a Niagara of debt. We will all suffer.
That was Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels giving the Republican response to the State of the Union last night. If you were watching our coverage, you might have seen Chris Matthews and I have a very different reaction from one another to the governor's speech. Chris loved the speech and identified correctly that Governor Daniels did show a little possible Republican softening on whether or not really rich people should get special favors in the tax code. And I love Chris Matthews. I love talking politics with him, and he was absolutely right to identify that, which I glossed over. In my own defense, the reason I glossed over it was hard for me to hear those kinds of specifics from Governor Daniels in the midst of the terrible, horrible series of unfortunate events that Lemony Daniels found himself mired in during this speech.
When President Obama claims that the state of our union is anything but grave, he must know in his heart that this is not true. Facing economic catastrophe, the dead end of debt, choking off growth, an unprecedented explosion of spending, radically worse. No nation, no entity, large or small, public or private, can thrive or survive intact. The mindless piling on moments of national danger, the mortal enemies, no feature of the Obama presidency has been sadder, will fall for the con job, the dead end of debt. It's not fair. No one's been more tragically harmed than the young people of this country.
Yes, those are lines taken out of context in this address, and no, he was not actually speaking in black and white in front of a stormy sky. But it does give you a pretty good idea of the overall tone of the Republican address last night. And the tone is, be afraid! Thunderbolt. Different people have different reactions to different speeches. Personally, after seeing that speech, I stopped understanding why Republicans long for a Mitch Daniels presidential candidacy. And I say that as a person who loves Lemony Snicket. But whether or not they do persuade their eventual candidate to pick Governor Daniels for vice president, or whether the clamor continues for him to belatedly join the presidential race himself, all that may depend as much on what happened in Governor Daniels' home state today as it does on the terrifying horror movie of a speech that he gave last night as the response to the State of the Union. Joining us now from Indianapolis, where the Republicans in the legislature were able to pass Governor Daniels' bill radically stripping union rights in Indiana, is Democrat Scott Pelath, who's the assistant Democratic leader in the Indiana House. Mr. Pelath, thank you very much for being here.
Hi, Rachel. Love the Lemony Snicket tie-in.
Is Governor Daniels always such of a bummer? I mean, as Republicans look at Indiana and they start thinking about Governor Daniels being on the ticket in November, is he always like that?
Oh, goodness. Yes, he is. And what a toxic brew we have in this state for workers right now and for regular everyday folks. You know, you've got people got swept into office in 2010 with this radical ideology, and frankly, the governor is one of them. That believes the solution to every economic problem is to make people work for less. You've got this intoxicant of big corporate campaign cash donations. And then you mix in Mitch Daniels, who is really trying to show off for the far right. It's about as much as we can put up with.
Well, in terms of him showing off, I mean, back in 2006, Governor Daniels not only did not support stripping union rights like this, going right to work in Indiana, he actually said he thought it would be a bad idea to pursue it. He said that multiple times over the time of his governorship in Indiana. Why do you think he changed his mind and is supporting this now?
Well, one more thing. He said it would cause a civil war in the state if he went forth with this idea. I frankly don't know why he changed his mind, why he did a flip-flop of that degree, but it seems pretty clear that it has something to do with his ambitions on the national level. To make himself attractive as a number 2 pick for vice president, you've got to please those guys. He needs to be a hero to them.
Democrats had been denying the Republicans in the state legislature a quorum so that they could not vote on this issue. I know that's how you held it off last year as well. Why did it finally pass today? What changed?
Well, look, we can't kill the bill through delay, but we can make it miserable for them by extending it, deciding when we're finally going to have votes on these things and giving the public a chance to weigh in. That's exactly what we did. The good news is this still hasn't become law. It's going to go over to the Indiana Senate, where they had a preliminary vote last week, but they're really only 4 votes shy from throwing right to work into the dustbin of history, putting it right in the trash can where it belongs. And these senators over there, they're not used to putting up with heat, and they've got another week where they're going to hear outcries from the public, and they're going to hear more about why is it so important to drive down wages, not just for union workers, but for everybody in the state.
In terms of the civil war that Governor Daniels had said might ensue if this were pursued, it sounds like, at least in a small scale, at least in political Indiana, that is happening. What do you think the prospects are for 4 senators changing their mind on this, for it being actually stopped in the Senate? How hopeful are you? Well,
as long as you're fighting, you're alive in this business. I tell you what, the Senate has shown more signs of being enlightened on this. We already saw a more bipartisan opposition over on the Senate side. Those guys like to sit over there and not be bothered. And when the protesters start turning their direction, it'll be interesting to see how some of them react, because we've seen an outpouring of the most intense opposition that really we've seen in a generation here in this state.
Do you think it's going to be evident when the eyes of the nation turn to Indianapolis to watch the Super Bowl in a couple of Sundays? Is it likely that this is? I know the NFL Players Association has been very vocal on your side of the argument, saying that they do not want this right to work legislation passed in Indiana. Do you think it's going to surface around the Super Bowl?
Well, I think it is. This is a gigantic embarrassment for the state. The eyes of the nation are going to be on us. You not only have the NFL players, but you have, the regular rank and file from around Indiana. Not just the union leaders themselves, but the people that benefit from unions. I have no doubt that they're going to be exercising their First Amendment rights, and they're going to have a national stage to do that.
Scott Pilath, Indiana State Representative, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'd love to stay in touch with you over the next couple of weeks as this keeps unfolding, sir. Would you mind coming back and joining us again?
Oh, I'd love to do it, Rachel, anytime.
All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right. Best new thing in the world today is still on deck. That's ahead. Also, I need to have a little talk with PolitiFact again. It's not going to be a happy conversation, but it is necessary. That's all coming up.